Coined by the British psychologist Humphrey Osmond, the term psychedelic means mind manifesting. Psychedelic music emerged during the 1960s among folk and rock bands in the United States and the United Kingdom, and included the subgenres of psychedelic folk, psychedelic rock, acid rock, and psychedelic pop, before declining in the early 1970s. Although the first psychedelic hits are considered to be the Yardbird Shape of Things and the Birds 8 Miles High, released in February and March 1966, my appetite for what some would call weird music started with Tomorrow Never Knows, from the Beatles' 1966 Revolver album. But my love of the psychedelic music genre really took off in February 1967, when the Beatles released Strawberry Fields Forever, which was coupled with Penny Lane on a double A-sided single. A succession of psychedelic album releases followed the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper, released at the end of May 1967. The Incredible String Band's 5,000 Spirits or The Layers of an Onion, a wonderful psychedelic folk album, Pink Floyd's debut album Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and my all-time favourite 60s band Cream released their second album Disraeli Gears in November. And on the 1st of December, Jimi Hendrix released Access Bold as Love. Bringing 1967 to a close were the Rolling Stones with their patchy Their Satanic Majesty's Request, which was released in the UK on the same day as the Beatles' even more patchier Magical Mystery Tour double EP on the 8th of December. The Magical Mystery Tour TV special was an even more patchy affair. Aired on BBC TV in black and white on Boxing Day 1967, it was panned by both the critics and the public alike. Even I, as a big Beatles fan, had trouble defending it amidst the scathing comments from my older relatives as the family sat round the TV to watch the Fab Four that Christmas. I had an even harder job trying to explain what it was about. Fortunately, Paul McCartney, in his Billy guise, appeared on TV the next day and explained matters to David Frost. The Beatles had goofed. Perhaps if it had been broadcast in colour and titled The Magical Mystery Trip, some of us might have got it. But we did at least get to see John Lennon perform I Am the Walrus. Eager to ride the psychedelic wave were lots of other groups who released records with a pop-orientated approach to psychedelia, including the Hollies and even the Trogs in 1967, albeit with varying degrees of chart success. Yet not every group wrote their songs under the influence of hallucinogenics. Reg Presley, although aware of the rising tide of psychedelic sounds, wrote the Trogs' creepy number, Night of the Long Grass, not whilst high, but over a nice cup of tea. The song scraped into the bottom of the UK Top 20 singles charts in 1967. The Trogs released their Cellophane album in December 1967, and although the shift to psychedelia was a good choice, the songwriting was weak. So perhaps Reg should have had a cup of coffee instead. I bought my psychedelic music from record stores. But where did the groups who created those sounds get the LSD from? That we'd seen discussed on the national TV news and read about in the national newspapers. At the age of 19, Donovan got a TV program to himself. Unfortunately for Donovan, a scene where his friends were seen smoking cannabis caught the attention of the later discredited drug squad officer, Norman Pilcher, and on the 10th of June 1966, Donovan became the first high-profile British pop star to be arrested for possession of cannabis. On the 16th of June 1966, ITN ran a story about Donovan's drug bust at his flat on the Edgware Road in London. After many notorious and legally dubious rock star arrests, Pilcher received a 4-year prison sentence in 1973 for perjury. He was given his own World in Action report made by Granada TV the same year, finally getting the fame he craved. Pilcher is said to have accepted when Lennon wrote I Am the Walrus with a reference to Semolina Pilchard. He may have well had Pilcher in mind, and was happy to be known as the Walrus. Lennon's arrest was the most highly publicised. Other musicians targeted by Pilcher's team were Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, who was raided in 1967, and the following year Tubby Hayes, the jazz saxophonist, who was found in possession of heroin. Harrison and Pattie Boyd were arrested for small quantities of cannabis found in their home in Esher, Surrey, in 1969. Donovan's drug use was mostly restricted to cannabis, with the occasional use of LSD and mescaline, according to the press. Both cannabis and mescaline are organic and naturally occurring, except not in England, of course. But LSD requires someone with knowledge of pharmaceuticals and a laboratory to produce it. It's not something you can grow on your remote Scottish farmhouse property. According to historian J. Stevens, in his book Storming Heaven, LSD and the American Dream, in the early days of recreational use, LSD users, who were mostly medical professionals and academics, fell into two broadly defined crowds. Stevens states that the first can be considered the conservative crowd. These people thought that LSD was too powerful and dangerous to allow it widespread production. They also believed that only the elite members of society, artists, scientists, writers, etc., should be able to have access to it. He thought that these were the people who would have the ability to take full advantage of the powerful creative drive and mindfulness that comes with LSD. Stevens describes the second group to be recreational users and much more radical about their beliefs in LSD. These people felt that LSD had the power to revolutionize society. They wanted LSD to become accessible to all people. This group then evolved and expanded into a subculture, where LSD was often seen as a mystical substance. Many popular musicians of the time were categorized into this second crowd. Jimi Hendrix, Pink Floyd, as well as the Beatles, all of whom rose to fame in 60s England. Due to its growing recreational popularity and mounting concern of its increasing use, in 1965 Sandoz Laboratories stopped all its legal shipments of LSD to the United States for psychiatric use. Despite this halt in legal shipments, the United States government, specifically the CIA, was still receiving LSD to support their covert operations and experiments. After turning on American LSD guru Timothy Leary, Englishman Michael Hollingshead returned to London in 1965. where he continued the MK-Ultra LSD research of Harvard University, becoming a founding member of the World Psychedelic Center, which was devoted to disseminating psychedelic literature and turning on intellectuals, writers, artists and pop stars. Apart from Leary, those Hollinghead is reputed to introduce to LSD include writers William Burroughs and Paul Krasner, comparative religion scholar Houston Smith, philosopher Alan Watts, graphic designer Storm Thorgerson, film director Roman Polanski, poet Allen Ginsberg, musicians Donovan, Keith Richards, Pete LaRocca, Charles Mingus, Maynard Ferguson, and of course Paul McCartney, John Lennon and George Harrison. Incidentally, it's been documented that Hollingshead used offshore pirate radio to further promote LSD. In the mid-1970s, Radio Caroline co-director Ronan O'Reilly became obsessed with the spiritual teacher Ram Dass, who in the early 1960s, alongside Timothy Leary, began to research psychedelic substances and grew to be a significant figure in the counterculture and psychedelic movements of the late 60s. Radio Caroline heavily promoted Ram Dass's philosophy of loving awareness, the apex of which was a concept album. And O'Reilly put a band together, and while they didn't last very long, the core musicians would go on to form the Blockheads, Ian Dury's backing band. Blockhead group members co-wrote Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll with Dury. It's strange what connections you make when you start joining the dots. After the London police raided his World Psychedelic Center and found some cannabis that Hollingshead had failed to flush down the toilet, the psychedelic missionary was given a sentence of 21 months in Wormwood Scrubs prison. It's been reported that Hollingshead supplied the LSD to the man George Harrison described as the Wicked Dentist, who in April 1965 spiked the coffees of the Beatles, John Lennon, and George Harrison and their wives, Cynthia Lennon and Pattie Boyd, with the then unknown drug. The Dentist has been named in the book, written by music writer Steve Turner, as John Riley, the son of a Metropolitan Police officer. Riley trained as a cosmetic dentist in Chicago and became a dentist to the stars. It would seem only someone working with British intelligence would take such actions against influential musicians if they knew they would be immune to any repercussions. After all, the Beatles were the valued property of EMI. After having their drinks spiked, George Harrison managed to drive the 4 tripping victims to the Pickwick Club, where they stumbled into the elevator and became convinced that the little red light in it was a raging fire. They then left the Pickwick Club and walked to the Ad-Lib in Leicester Place, the epicentre of swinging 60s London. Some believe John Lennon's LSD experience spawned the lyrics of the single Help, released in July 1965. On the 17th of June 1967, Life magazine ran an interview with Paul McCartney, in which the Beatle admitted having taken LSD. The UK press immediately seized upon it, and 2 days later, McCartney gave a statement to Independent Television News. In Paul's back garden, in 7 Cavendish Avenue, the ITN TV news reporter asked McCartney if this was a matter he should have kept private. McCartney put forward an argument for media responsibility, an ethical obligation to seek the truth and share it. Let's be realistic. Whoever knowingly lets the cat out of the bag is ultimately responsible for its release. The normally Beatles-friendly best-selling tabloid, the Daily Mirror, called Paul McCartney a bloody fool for taking LSD in its editorial, and advised him to see a psychiatrist. No doubt one from the Tavistock Clinic would have been on hand if required. In a subsequent Daily Mirror interview, McCartney said, "I won't agree that I've swayed kids into taking LSD. Kids do what they want to do, always." Yet without McCartney's televised disclosure, and the highly publicised drug busts of their pop idols, accompanied with lurid tabloid headlines, most 60s British teenagers wouldn't have been aware of LSD or cannabis. And their psychedelic music idols certainly wouldn't have obtained LSD if it hadn't been for the CIA and other alphabet agency assets, who brought it to swinging England's shores and distributed it.